What if one winter mistake could bind two lonely souls tighter than a vow? The wind in Dry Creek did not whisper. It scraped across the land like a knife dragged over stone, carrying red Wyoming dust that settled in every crease of a man's skin. It was the winter of 1878, and the cold felt like judgment. Willow Run, the town's thin lifeline of water, was no more than a muddy thread. Hope was scarcer than firewood. Cassian Hale sat on the edge of a cot inside May Kelly's boarding house. His worn saddle rested on the floor beside him, its leather dark with age, shaped by years on the trail. He had ridden into Dry Creek only 3 nights before, planning to stay one night. Then his horse threw a shoe, the blacksmith got busy, and the wind started kicking up. He told himself those were the reasons he stayed. He refused to look at the truth, that he was tired down to the soul. He had been a scout once, a good one. But the same skills that kept a man alive in the wilderness were the same ones that hollowed him out. At 33, he no longer carried a gun belt, but the memory of its weight stayed on his hips like a ghost. His plan was simple. Pass through, make no attachments, feel nothing. Love, he knew, burned a man colder than the winter wind. May Kelly stood in the doorway with a steaming mug. Her smile carried more warmth than the fire. "It's just coffee," she said gently. "I can pay," Cass replied. "It's a gift," she said. "A town this dry can still offer kindness. You look like a man wrestling with a ghost." He took the mug, the heat shocking his fingers. "Just one ghost," he said quietly. "And I'm letting him win." He planned to leave at dawn, no more delays. But that was when the stagecoach thundered down the main street in a cloud of red dust. The horses looked as tired as the people watching from porches and windows. Then a young woman stepped down from the coach. Abigail Whitlow, 21. Slim. Dark hair pulled tight, eyes the color of sherry and full of worry. She clutched a worn satchel like it held the last thing she owned, and it did. Inside was a deed to a small plot of land with a deep well that belonged to her family, and a letter making her the new schoolteacher for a school that did not yet exist. Her mother, sick and fading fast, waited for her in a small cabin on the edge of town. Abigail walked down the dusty street, and every stare she met was sharp. She was alone. She was mixed heritage. She was new. Her fear tasted like metal on her tongue. Across the street, Silas Thorne watched her from the boardwalk of his well-kept mercantile. At 45, he looked like a man carved from hard money and harder ambition. He owned the largest ranch and was slowly buying every water source in the valley. His eyes narrowed when he saw the girl. She carried something he wanted, something he had been trying to get for years. The well. Before Abigail could take 3 more steps, chaos erupted. A heavy freight wagon, its brake lever snapping with a sharp crack, rolled backwards down the incline. A little boy stood frozen on the road, terror widening his eyes. People screamed. No one moved fast enough. Except Cassian Hale. He didn't think. He vaulted off the boarding house porch, landed on his horse, and shot forward like he had been launched from a cannon. The wagon thundered closer. Cass leaned low, scooped the boy into his arms just in time, and veered away as the wagon slammed into the town's watering trough, shattering it to splinters. Silence crashed over the street. Cass sat tall on his horse, breathing hard, the child safe in his arms. Dry Creek stared at him, with a mix of awe and suspicion. A man who moved like that wasn't just a drifter. He was dangerous in a way the plains understood. Silas Thorne didn't look at Cass. He looked at the spilled papers that had fallen from Abigail's satchel. The deed lay open in the dust, its official seal bright in the morning light. Thorne's eyes tightened. Now he knew her name. And he knew exactly what she had brought into his valley. That night, after Abigail settled her mother in their small cabin, a knock came at the door. She opened it to find Silas Thorne, standing with a polite smile that never reached his eyes. "Welcome to Dry Creek, Miss Whitlow," he said smoothly. "I witnessed your arrival. Unfortunate excitement. I hope you're not too shaken." "We're fine," she answered. "I understand this land now belongs to you," he continued. "Hard land, hard wind, hard life. I would be willing to take it off your hands for a very fair price. A kindness, really. Abigail met his gaze with quiet steel. The land is not for sale. My father built this house. His smile hardened. Sentiment does not draw water. Think on my offer. He tipped his hat and walked away, his shadow long in the twilight. Abigail closed the door and leaned against it, heart racing. This wasn't just a new beginning. This was a battle. The next days were a blur of work and hardship. She cleaned the cabin, tended to her mother, and walked through the abandoned barn she was meant to turn into a schoolhouse. The wind pushed through every crack. The cold chewed at her fingers. Dry Creek watched her with suspicion and envy. She had the one thing they needed: water. 2 nights later, 2 of Thorne's men rode onto her land. They didn't even try to hide. They shifted a boundary marker near her well, a silent threat. They thought she was asleep. She wasn't. Abigail lifted her father's old shotgun, stepped outside, and fired a single shot into the sky. The thunder of it rolled down the valley like a challenge. The men fled. From the livery, Cass heard the blast. He saw the fleeing riders and the small, flickering light inside the Whitlow cabin. He was supposed to leave at dawn, but suddenly, leaving felt wrong. The next morning, he didn't pack. He walked toward her barn instead. What happened next would tie their fates together, tighter than either of them could imagine. What if the person you tried hardest to avoid became the one you could no longer walk away from? The morning after Abigail fired the shotgun, Cassian Hale walked toward her broken-down barn with a purpose he did not fully understand. He told himself he was just checking on things, making sure no trouble had followed the warning shot, but the truth pressed harder than the wind at his back. He couldn't ride north knowing she was standing alone against a man like Silas Thorne. He found her wrestling with a warped plank, her small frame straining with stubborn determination. Her cheeks were smudged with dust. Her hands were raw. She looked up when she sensed his shadow cross the ground. "I heard some noise out this way last night," he said. Abigail didn't flinch. "The wind makes all kinds of noise." Cass gave a faint half-smile. This one sounded like a 12-gauge. Her chin lifted slightly. Sometimes the wind needs a loud answer. She turned back to the plank, tugging again. It didn't budge. Cass watched her struggle for a long moment. "What are you trying to do? Tear the barn down or hold it together?" "I'm building a school," she said simply. He looked at the sagging roof, the broken boards, the yawning gaps in the walls. A school was the last thing the structure looked capable of being. "You'll need more than stubbornness," he said. "You'll need a hammer, a pry bar, new nails." "I have a hammer," she interrupted, "just not a pry bar." Quote, Without asking permission, Cass stepped into the barn. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old wood. He ran a hand along a rotted beam. The barn groaned like an old man. "This is not a one-person job," he said, turning back to her. "I don't have money to hire help," she replied. "I'm not asking for money." Something softened in her face. Not trust, not yet, but recognition of sincerity. She studied him, really seeing him for the first time. The quiet competence. The steady presence. The way he moved, like a man who had rebuilt more than wood in his lifetime. She nodded once. "All right, Mr. Hale. But I'm the teacher. The work is done to my standards." And so they began. Cass moved with quiet efficiency, securing beams, replacing warped boards, studying every angle like he could hear the building talk. Abigail swept out years of dust, cleared debris, sorted usable timber from the rotten. Their hands brushed once when reaching for the same plank. Both pretended not to notice the spark that snapped between them. By the 3rd day, something unspoken had formed. A rhythm. He would gesture. She would understand. She would point. He would fix. They spoke little, but worked like 2 halves of the same thought. One afternoon, Abigail stood over him as he measured planks for student benches. "You cut that one short," she said, arms crossed. Cass squinted down at the board. "Look straight to me." She picked up a charcoal nub and wrote a perfect letter A on a scrap of wood. "Children need steady surfaces to learn neatly." If the desk wobbles, their letters will wobble. Cass raised a brow. A quarter-inch won't turn a boy into a scoundrel. It's the principle, she insisted. He sighed. Fine. We'll make them desks fit for a king. But after they learn letters, someone needs to teach them how to shoot straight. A tiny smile appeared on her lips. Maybe that can be your lesson, Mr. Hale. They worked until the barn became something close to a promise. A patched roof, rough benches, a salvaged blackboard, cracked but steady. It wasn't much, but it was a place where hope could take root. But Silas Thorne was not finished. He didn't confront Abigail again. He didn't need to. He planted seeds. Quiet whispers in the saloon, half sentences inside the mercantile, a raised brow here, a murmur there, a woman of mixed blood, alone on a property with a valuable well, a school too close to his water rights, a stranger helping her rebuild. Reverend Pike echoed the poison from his pulpit. Wolves in sheep's clothing, he warned. Influence that corrupts. He never named Abigail, but the whole town knew. Mothers pulled their children away from her. Men avoided her gaze. The blacksmith who promised nails suddenly had none. The air around her grew colder than the winter wind. One night, Abigail sat by her mother's bedside and whispered, "They want me to fail." Her mother's hand, weak but steady, squeezed hers. "Pride is a stone," she whispered. "It will drown you if you cling too hard. Ask for help, Mia. Not beg. Ask. People want to give what they can spare." The next morning, Abigail walked door to door, not to ask for money, but for scraps, broken boards, spare hinges, a pot of lard for rusted tools, a small kindness each family could give without fear of thorn. Slowly, a few families began to help. But danger struck before hope could bloom. Dr. Nora Brennan, the only person who visited regularly, found Abigail at the well one cold afternoon. "Your secondary well is dropping too fast," she warned. "It feels unnatural, as though something is pulling water away." The words chilled Abigail. That night, Cass walked the edges of her land out of instinct, out of concern, out of something deeper he refused to name. Near the creek, he found a boundary stake driven into the wrong place. Moved, hidden. Thorne was stealing her land. Cass felt heat rise through his chest. Not anger, but a fierce protective fire he hadn't felt since before he lost everything. The next morning brought snow, thick, heavy flakes that swallowed the horizon. Abigail set out in her wagon for supplies and school materials. She expected to return before the storm deepened, but the blizzard hit suddenly. Visibility dropped. Cold tore at her fingers. Fear pressed into her chest. Then she saw it, the faint glow of the lone juniper way station. She stumbled inside, half frozen. Every room was full, every cot taken, except one, except his. Cassian had taken a small room upstairs hours before. When he came in later, brushing snow from his coat, he opened the door quietly and froze. Abigail Whitlow lay asleep in his bed, boots off, wrapped in a blanket, shaking from cold and exhaustion, vulnerable in a way that shook something deep inside him. He could wake her, he could send her downstairs, but the shame she would face, the whispers, Pike's judgment, Thorne's satisfaction, it would crush her. Cass stood over her for a long moment, breathing slow, thinking, fighting the ghosts of his past. Then he made his choice. He draped his warm coat over her shoulders, tucked it gently around her, and sat in the wooden chair by the hearth. He added a log to the embers. The flames cast a soft glow over the room, and he kept watch, all night, while outside, the blizzard buried the world in white. While inside, a cowboy made a silent vow he never meant to make again. What if the whole town tried to break you, but the one person you never expected became the reason you rose again? Dawn broke over the lone juniper way station like a soft confession. The storm had gone silent. Snow lay thick and perfect outside the frosted window. Inside, Cassian Hale sat in the wooden chair, stiff from hours without sleep. The fire had died into a glow of embers. His coat lay over Abigail Whitlow, who slept with a peace she had not known in months. When she woke, confusion struck her first. Then fear. Then shame. She bolted upright, Clutching the blanket to her chest, Cass rose slowly. His voice was gentle. "The storm hit fast. There wasn't a free bed left. I'll head downstairs so you can gather yourself." No accusations, no questions, no judgment, just dignity. She nodded, unable to speak. He slipped out the door and closed it quietly behind him. Downstairs, May Kelly handed him a cup of coffee without asking anything. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the silent burden he carried. When Abigail finally came down, cheeks flushed, hair hastily pinned, a few travelers stared. A whisper rose. May Kelly stepped forward, her voice strong and clear. "Terrible storm last night. Lucky we all found a place to stand. That's all anyone needs to say." And that was the end of it, for now. But Dry Creek was a place where rumors took root faster than weeds. The ride back to town was quiet. Snow softened the world, muffling every sound. Cass rode beside her, close enough to shield her from the wind, far enough to give her space. They didn't speak of the night. They didn't need to. Something had shifted between them, something too fragile to name. But the silence waiting in Dry Creek was not gentle. By nightfall, the whispers had turned sharp. Mothers pulled their children away when Abigail walked past. The blacksmith who had promised her nails suddenly had none. In the mercantile, she felt eyes burn into her back. Silas Thorne's influence spread like poison. Sunday came, and with it Reverend Pike's sermon. He spoke of fallen women, of moral impurity, of dangerous influences. He never said her name. He didn't have to. The whole church turned to look at her. After the service, Pike, Thorne, and 2 elders cornered her near the steps. Cass saw it happening and headed toward them, but not fast enough. Pike's voice rang loud. "Miss Whitlow, your conduct at the way station has become a grave concern to this community. You have compromised your moral standing. Therefore, unless you correct this scandal, you will no longer teach our children." Abigail's voice was low but steady. "I sought shelter in a blizzard, nothing more." Pike lifted his chin. "A single woman in a man's room? Reputation matters. The town demands you announce your engagement to Mr. Hale. Only marriage will repair the damage." Abigail froze. Cass stepped to her side. "This is between us," he said sharply, "not the town." Thorne touched Cass's arm, smiling like a snake. "No, my boy. When a woman teaches our children, it becomes everyone's concern." Quote, that night, Cass found Abigail alone in the half-built schoolhouse. The cracked blackboard behind her looked like a wound. "They mean to break you," he said softly. "I can't marry to save my reputation," she whispered. "That is not freedom." "There's another way," Cass said. "A temporary engagement. A story we tell to keep Pike quiet. To protect the school. Nothing binding, no vows." Abigail stared at him, torn between fear and gratitude. Before she could answer, Dr. Nora Brennan entered with dirt on her skirts and fury in her eyes. "I found it," she said. "A hidden pipe buried near your well. Thorne is siphoning your water." Abigail felt the world tilt. Cass felt something else. Purpose, that night, changed everything. Cass walked the creek bed and found survey stakes moved, land shifted, lines stolen. He felt old instincts come alive. Not the instincts of a drifter, the instincts of a protector. Deputy Crowley found him in the dark, shaking with guilt, and handed him a rolled map. Thorne's secret geological survey showing exactly how much water he wanted to take. "I can't serve a man like him anymore," Crowley whispered. "Use this." The next days were war. The schoolhouse was burned by hired hands. Smoke filled the valley. Abigail and Cass rushed the children out, but smoke seeped into her cabin. Her mother inhaled too much. Her breathing weakened. Abigail sat all night at her mother's side as Cass kept vigil in the corner, silent but steady. When her mother passed at dawn, Cass whispered the truth he had long hidden. "When my wife died, I ran. I ran from everything, but I won't run from you." Her mother's final words echoed in her ears. "Do not live with your head bowed." By morning, Abigail stood straighter than the schoolhouse ever had, and she made her choice. "I'll do it," she told Cass. "We announce an engagement, not to save me, to save the school." Their final proof came when they found Thorne's illegal dam, swollen with melting snow, ready to burst. Cass photographed everything: the pipe, the stake, the dam. He gathered evidence like ammunition. When Thorne dragged Abigail into court, Cass walked in with truth on his side. But nature judged faster than any courtroom. A crack thundered through the valley. The dam broke. A wall of water tore down the canyon, swallowing fences, barns, everything in its path. Men yelled for horses. Women screamed for their children. The entire town scrambled for higher ground. Cass didn't run. He charged into the flood beside Hayes and Crowley, hauling ranch hands from rooftops, pulling livestock from the current. Then he saw him, Silas Thorne, pinned under his porch beam as water rose to his chest. He could let the flood finish him. He could watch justice take shape in muddy water. But Cass was not built for vengeance. He fought the current, freed Thorne's leg, dragged him to a horse, and saved the very man who tried to ruin them all. Because Cass Hale didn't choose violence, he chose Abigail. When the water finally receded, Dry Creek saw the truth with their own eyes: Thorne's lies, Pike's hypocrisy, the stolen water, the burned school, the cruel rumors. The town rose around Abigail Whitlow like a shield. Crowley became sheriff. Pike was cast out. Thorne left Dry Creek with nothing. Families donated land, lumber, paint, nails. A new schoolhouse rose on the hill, strong, warm, proud. At its door hung the sign Abigail had painted the day before the fire: "Knowledge needs water and courage." Weeks later, under a grove of shimmering aspens, Cass and Abigail married in a simple ceremony. No sermon, no shame, no fear, only truth. During the small celebration, Abigail noticed a quiet little girl named Nava, an orphan of the flood, hovering near them. Abby knelt and offered her cornbread. Nava smiled. Cass touched Abby's shoulder. Their family had just begun. That night, in their small, warm cabin, Cass lay awake beside her, out of habit, out of a lifetime of guarding, out of something deeper. Abigail smiled in the firelight. "You can sleep now, Cassian. You've watched over me long enough." He turned toward her, eyes soft. "I have a lifetime to watch over you." For the first time in years, he let himself rest, truly rest. The ghosts faded, the fire dimmed, the world outside went quiet. Abigail leaned close and whispered the words she once heard him say to the fire on the blizzard night: "Fear means you have something worth living for." Cass stirred, smiling in his sleep. His answer was a soft, peaceful murmur: "And I've made my choice.